Why don't you introduce yourself, tell us who you are, and then what you do here.
My name is Kevin Kennedy. I am one of the student facilitators of the classes here at Unarius. I'm on the board of directors. Mostly I'm a student. I have been a student for over 30 years. And as Unarius teaches all about personal growth, there's no point where you end personal growth. And so when all is said and done, that's what I mainly am as a student here at this academy.
So you're saying that the Unarians believe that people are reincarnated and that they sort of share certain characteristics from each reincarnation?
Absolutely.
And these develop over the course of lifetimes, and eventually, say, by the time we get to the 21st century, you have
a lot of baggage.
Okay.
Okay. All of us have lived many, many lives. And the experiences that we've gone through in those many lives make up who we are. That includes the abilities that we have. So a perfect example is a Mozart, who was writing symphonies at 5 or 4 or whatever it was. And, you ask, well, why can't I do that? If he's doing that, why can't I do that? Well, there's an example of a soul who'd spent many lifetimes learning about music, studying on what we term the inner worlds or the higher planes of life. Then when they incarnate back again, it's as natural as breathing for a Mozart to write music, you see. In the same vein, I was drawing since I could remember, and it was very natural for me. And so you'd say, well, he's gifted. Well, no, it wasn't that I was quote-unquote gifted. It's something that I'd spent many lifetimes developing, so it was natural for me to draw. 4 or 5 years old, I started drawing. I didn't stop. Along with that, though, we also carry a lot of emotional problems and negations just in living throughout the many societies that have, been a part of this earth world. I mean, you can just use your imagination to think about what it was like living through the Inquisition, or being involved with some of the wars and being murdered on a battlefield. Or, I mean, there's just so many ways that all of us have incurred different psychic shocks through those many lifetimes. So what Unarius teaches us is, if we can mentally go back and change and recognize where that emotion is coming from and unlock it and dissipate it, then we no longer have that inhibition or that waveform in our psychic anatomy causing the distress right now in the present. And it's a very involved study, but once you begin to use the principles that are taught here, you begin to recognize that every situation you end up in is a tremendous opportunity for personal growth. My first recognitions, as a good example, with my father, which were very difficult, because he was an alcoholic and he was very egotistical person, and he had just a lot of emotional problems that he was dealing with. My first recognitions as a student weren't, gee, he and I have battled it out before. They were very one-sided of, I was still blaming him. If I hadn't been born in that awful family, if he wasn't such a jerk, my life would be better. As I began to use the principles that are taught here, I began to see and be able to go back mentally throughout my childhood and see, oh, this is why there was that tremendous confrontation. And this is why we had the arguments and the fights. And be able to take apart all that emotion. And when I did that, the relationship between he and I completely changed. And the recognitions I had, just to give you a background, were my father was in the military. He was in the Navy he was a lifer. I think he was in there for 35 years or something like that. And spent, I think, at least 2 tours in Vietnam, if not 3. Was in World War II, Korean War. And when I was growing up, he wanted me to go into the military as well. He gave me a rifle when I was 4 years old. Who gives a kid a rifle when they're 4 years old? This is ridiculous. Well, as I began to study Unarius, I began to recognize, oh, he and I have been involved on the battlefields. And that's why there's this butting of heads and why there's tremendous competition between us.
So are you able to recognize what roles you played in the last lifetime? I mean, could you pinpoint the interaction between you in the past?
I could pinpoint the interaction. I couldn't pinpoint specifically on where it happened exactly, but what I was able to do, which is actually the most important part of this study of past lives and understanding where you've been before, It's not necessarily the exact situation, it's the emotional content of that situation. So with the recognition of the tremendous resentment between my father and myself, and changing that, discharging that, that's what changed the relationship between us. Now here's an example, because this is important. There is tremendous power in being able to objectify and change the bias of these past lifetimes. When I had my recognitions with my father, and again, I was using the tools that we teach here at Unarius on how to go back, how to discover where you've been before, and the many lessons that are available here. When I was able to discharge this, my father was an intense alcoholic. He drank one of those big, huge things of Jim Beam just about every day. We're talking about big-time alcohol.
Yeah.
When I had my recognition, I knew, I said, oh, that's it. You know, he and I have fought it out on the battlefields, and there's just been a lot of resentment that's gone between us. When I had my recognitions and my acceptance of my responsibility in this situation, I recognized in him a humanity that I'd never seen before. And I knew that he had done the absolute best job that he could do with the tools that he had in raising us. And so I sat down, and I was probably 21, 22, and I wrote him a letter. And I said, Dad, I just want you to know that I love you, and you did the absolute best that you could do in raising me, and I appreciate you for that. And it was heartfelt, and I meant it. On the letter, you know, I wrote on it, Mom, this isn't for you, this is for Dad. Well, 3 days after he received that letter, I got a call from my mother, who said to me, what did you write? Because your father's quit drinking. Wow. Definitely wow. Yeah. And that's the power in being able to go back and discharge the negations of these past lifetimes and the effect they're having in the present.